Hello, today I'm going to be ranking every King Crimson studio album from 1969 to 2003. So that's 13 albums in total. I'm not going to be doing any live albums or EPs or anything. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm actually going to see King Crimson next month. They're coming to Scotland and I'm going to see them, and I'm really excited about it. So this will sort of get me in the mood for it. Hopefully I'm sort of thinking about King Crimson at the moment, so I felt like doing a video. Plus I'll be listening to a lot of their music between now and then, get me in the mood. So I just sort of felt like doing a video about King Crimson. Just a quick one to say. I just listened to the first time to David Jackson and David Cross Another Day, and which was released this year, and it's really good. It's really unique and experimental, and though it's their saxophone and violin players, there's actually a lot of really good bass lines and drumming from the other members. So it's not just them that sort of shine through it. All the members do. It's really good, and I really wasn't quite sure what to expect with it. I was expecting a sort of mix between Vandergraaf Generator and King Crimson. There is some of that, but there's also really new, sort of more unique sounds that are very interesting, and I wasn't expecting to hear them. But anyway, let's go on with the list. My 13th favourite and my personal least favourite King Crimson album, at number 13, Three of a Perfect Pair, released in 1984. The reason that I'd say this is their worst is because it's the only King Crimson album I can name that doesn't have a single brilliant song. All their other albums have at least one brilliant track on it. This one doesn't have one. There are some good ones, some really good ones, but nothing fantastic. I think this was an attempt to mix together the sounds of the two previous albums that came out before this, Discipline and Beat. Discipline was more experimental and complex, while Beat was a bit more simple and stripped down. I think they were trying to fling these two sounds together, and it doesn't really work. They sort of you've got one side which is more pop songs, more straightforward stuff, and another side that's more experimental, more sort of out there stuff, and it's a bit jarring. And even the experimental stuff isn't that good. I don't like it very much. I applaud the band for trying something sort of unique and different here, and there's definitely some new sounds, but I'd say the more pop stuff on the first side is actually better than the second side, though when it comes to music I tend to prefer the more experimental stuff. Songs like Model Man and Man with an Open Heart are pretty good pop songs, I'd say, so I don't really have much to complain about there. I just think when the experimental stuff doesn't really fall through, then it's a bit disappointing, unlike albums like Discipline, where the pop songs, or more popish songs like Fatal, frame by Frame, sorry, and Mate Kudasai, but you've also got more experimental stuff like The Sheltering Sky and Thela Hunjinji, if I pronounced that right, which are also really good, and we will get to the album later on, obviously. So I just think it doesn't work very well with the album, and it's not particularly great. At number 12, Thrax from 1995. This was the first of the trilogy of King Crimson albums where they started to experiment slightly with industrial sounds and more progressive metal. And they also had the double trio at that time, 2 guitars, 2 basses and 2 drums. And I don't think it works very well. I think it has a bit of a too many cooks spoil the broth sort of thing going on for it. Plus, I'd say the only really good song on it is Walking on Air. That's my personal favourite. And like I said, all 12 of the albums from 12 to 1 have all got at least one brilliant, and most of them have got more than one, like a lot of them. As it goes on, there'll be more and more. But I'd say Walking on Air is the only brilliant song on this. I think it's one of their best songs ever. Baboom and Vroom Vroom are also good, but not brilliant. I just think the album goes on a bit too long as well. I don't think it needs to be as long as it is, and I just don't think there's that many interesting riffs or songs on it. That's all. I just don't think Thrax that good compared to other King Crimson fans. So sorry. Number 11, Lessard from 1970. This is widely considered a not particularly good album, and I'd say it's definitely the worst of the sort of first era of the band. I would say the second side is good. It's taken up by the title track, 23-minute one, which is the longest King Crimson song, and the only time they ever did a really long song. I think Larks Tongues and Aspect Part 1 is actually their second longest track, and that's 10 minutes shorter than this. But the first side just isn't great at all. You've got Indoor Games, Happy Family, songs like that, which just aren't great. They're decent, they're alright, but they're not brilliant at all. All around, I think it's a disappointing album that doesn't quite have a set personality or what it wants to be. Again, and it's also not a great through listen. Though I would say the 23-minute title track, Lessard, is really good. It grew on me over time. Originally, I didn't like it very much, but the more and more I've listened to it, it's more and more it's grown on me. So I'd say the second side of the album is very good, but the first side just isn't at all. I'd say it's quite disappointing, the first side. But anyway, on to number 10, The Power to Believe from 2003, King Crimson's most recent studio album, and hopefully not their last. Well, this is a good album. I'd personally say it's better than Thrax. You've got songs like Level 5, I'd say is one of King Crimson's best tracks. It's an instrumental, and it's really, really good. It's very dark, I think the industrial sounds that they were going for work a lot better on this album than they did on Thrax. I personally think that getting rid of Tony Levin and Bill Bruford was actually a good idea. Though I think Bill Bruford is the greatest drummer of all time, and Tony Levin's obviously a fantastic bassist / Chapman stick player. I think Pat Mastalotto, I think that's his name, and Trey Gunn, I think work a lot better with this sort of the new ideas of King Crimson that came about during the Thrax era, from this album to Thrax. There's other good songs on it. Eyed Wide Open's good. Electric's a bit strange. Happy with What You Have to Be Happy With is good. I just think it's not brilliant. Again, I don't think it flows particularly well as an album. I think it starts off really well with Level 5, and then it doesn't reach that level of quality again throughout the album. So that's a bit disappointing. But all around, I'd say it's a good album, but I'd say hopefully certainly not their last. Okay, number 9, The Construction of Light. That's a very dark album cover, I don't know if you can see it. This is widely considered to be King Crimson's worst album ever. I disagree with that, obviously, but I thought a lot of people, I don't think they give the album enough credit at all. I think there's some really good songs on it, like The Road's My Oyster Soup, Kitchen Floor Wax Museum. I think is a good song if people would actually give it a chance. It's most of it's in 11/8, and I think that Robert Fripp's sort of guitar solo that sort of sounds like piano is very interesting. That's pretty good. Into the Frying Pan has some really cool riffs on it. Larks Tongues and Aspect Part 4 isn't brilliant, but it's good if you listen to it with the volume right up. If you listen to it with headphones and you listen to the volume right up, it's so heavy and loud. It's invigorating. Again, all round, it's not a brilliant album as a straight through listen, but I'd say it's better than the other two in the Thrax era. It's my personal favourite of the Thrax era, which in my opinion is the worst of King Crimson's music, their fourth era, all round. But I think that they're 3 decent albums, and I personally say this is the best. Okay, what are we at? Number 8? Number 8. Beat from 1982. I first listened to this album, I was expecting something similar to Discipline, but I wasn't expecting it to be as similar as it was. But it's also very different at times. Like Sartori and Tangier is my personal favourite from the album, and that's a tremendous instrumental. It's quite simplistic, but it has a fantastic beat to it. Neil and Jack and Me is one of my favourite, more simplistic songs of theirs, of the sort of 80s era. Neurotica is really good, and The Howler is also really good. I like Requiem. It's sort of a throwback to the 80s sound. I mean, early 70s sound. Songs like The Devil's Triangle. But all around, it's a good album. It's not as good as Discipline. Discipline's easily the best album of their 80s stuff, but it's certainly better than Three of a Perfect Pair, and it flows a lot better as an album. It flows, and I'd probably say that's one of the best things about it. Some King Crimson albums don't flow very well. Like all the ones I've mentioned so far don't flow particularly well as albums if you listen to them from start to finish, but I'd say from this one to the end of the list, they all flow well as albums. So, but Beat is a very good album, and I'd say it's got some other absolute best tracks on it, especially Sartorial Tangier. I think that's fantastic, especially Robert Fripp's guitar work. Okay, number 7, In the Wake of Poseidon. This was a difficult album because it had to follow up in the Court of the Crimson King, and while the Court of the Crimson King was a much more focused piece of material, the piece of work, this was a lot more sort of difficult because certain band members had left and new ones had come in. There is definitely a similarity to In the Court of the Crimson King, though I wouldn't say it's the exact same. A lot of people say that it's pretty much the exact same album as In the Court of the Crimson King. All the sounds are the same. I really disagree with that. I would say, okay, Pictures of a City is a sort of slower version of 21st Century Schizoid Man, and then The Wake of Poseidon is a sort of epitaph. But there's songs like Cat Food, Cadence, and Cascade that sound very, like they hadn't done anything like that before. And The Devil's Triangle, which isn't brilliant, but it's certainly unique. So I think people sort of throw this album, toss this album aside and sort of say, oh, it's a wannabe In the Court of the Crimson King. I totally disagree. I think it very much has its own personality. I think, for example, Pictures of a City does sound very different to 21st Century Schizoid Man. They're definitely not the same song at all. I think the album does have its own personality, and people don't give it enough credit. Okay, number 6, Red. This is going to piss off quite a few people because a lot of people absolutely love this album. It is very good. A lot of people would say this should easily be at least in the top 3. I've never been a huge fan of it. I would say the reason is because of Starless. I don't like Starless the way other King Crimson fans do. I think they've got better songs, better long songs as well. Though this is the first out of 6 of that sort of trilogy of albums that came out in between 73 and 74. So you can tell this is a very good era for the band, probably their best era. But I personally just don't think Red is as good as everybody says it is. Fallen Angel is my personal favourite on the album. I think it's very grungy, and I'd actually say Red is probably the first grunge album ever. It's a very heavy album. It's very dark at times. But I think it was sort of maybe missing something. Bill Buford's drumming on it is brilliant. John Wetton's bass is fantastic. But I think maybe if David Cross had stuck around, it would have worked a bit better. But I do like their really heavy guitars on it. I'm sort of conflicted. I don't know how to feel about Red at times. I just personally don't think Starless is as good as everybody says it is. I think they've got better tracks. Providence isn't great, isn't brilliant either. I used to really like One More Red Nightmare. I don't like it as much as I used to, and the title track is, I'd say, very good. The first 2 songs are the best, I'd say, especially Fallen Angel. I like how it's sort of whimsical at the beginning, then the chorus is really dark. I like that. But all around, Red is a great album to listen to from start to finish. Very, very much has its own personality. It's very much its own thing, and I like that about Red. But I just don't quite think it's as good as everybody says it is. Okay, number 5, or into the top 5. Starless and Babel Black. This one was actually the last King Crimson album that I listened to for the first time. Out of all their studio albums, I actually listened to this one last. I'm not totally sure why. I was expecting somewhere between, like, a mix between Red and Larks Tongues and Aspects. I was expecting somewhere in the middle. And I would say it's like that at times. You've got the sort of fast-paced, heavy stuff on like The Great Deceiver, and there's some really dark, heavy stuff on like Fracture that sort of reminds me of some of the stuff on Red. But I personally say Fracture is better than Starless, Starless. And I would say songs like Trio are absolutely beautiful. I'd say it's better than Providence. Also, Lament has some really cool bass lines on it. Trio's absolutely beautiful. I just want to reiterate. I think that's one of their best instrumentals. But Fracture is absolutely tremendous. I wouldn't say Starless and Babel Black's very good. I think it's a bit, but I think Fracture is really, really good. So all around, I'd say it's a really good album. Okay, number 4, Islands. This is one of the kind of forgotten King Crimson albums. It's the final album from their first era. It was released in 1971. Oh yeah, I haven't been saying the years they came out. Doesn't matter. This was released in 1971, and it was the last album before everybody left, basically, before Robert Fripp had to rebuild the band again in 1973. And it's sort of forgotten about. I just want to say, immediately you can say that half the album is brilliant, because the first track and the last track are both about 10 minutes, and they're both tremendous. Formentera Lady and Islands are two King Crimson's greatest songs ever, I'd say, and they're both really, really good. I like this album has more of a slow, sort of whimsical tone to it, while the first three albums were more in your face a bit, if you know what I mean, with a bit heavier, a bit darker. This one sort of slows the pace down, and it's really, really beautiful. I'd say it's maybe their most beautiful album, actually. Sailor's Tale's also really good. It's quite jazzy, but not jazzy in the way 21st Century Schizoid Man's jazzy. Certain instruments take a back seat that were more in the forefront of songs like that. I'd say the other three songs on it aren't quite as good, but Prelude's good, Song of the Girls is good, but Islands is my personal favourite, and Formentera Lady as well. Those two are absolutely brilliant. The album's bookended by two fantastic 10-minute songs, so I'd say it's one of King Crimson's absolute best and very underrated. Number 3, In the Court of the Crimson King, King Crimson's first ever album, and the album that changed prog rock forever. Oh, this probably will annoy a lot of people, because a lot of people would say this is easily the best. And anyone who knows King Crimson knows the other two that I haven't mentioned, and most people would probably agree that those are two of the best as well. It is an absolute masterpiece. It is one of the greatest albums of all time. I'm not denying that for a second. I just personally prefer the other two. 21st Century Schizoid Man obviously just totally blows you away, though I actually prefer Pictures of a City. I prefer this sort of more sort of, I don't know, the sort of slightly funkier sort of tune to it. I Talk to the Wind is absolutely tremendous. One of the greatest songs ever made. Epitaph's very, very good. I'd say Epitaph is better than In the Wake of Poseidon, the track. Epitaph is absolutely beautiful, and probably Greg Lake's best song ever in terms of his vocals. Moonchild it's kind of the ugly duckling of the album. I've heard it referred to as that. I'd certainly agree in some ways. First 3 minutes is a sort of slow melodic tune, then you get like 9 minutes of psychedelic noodling. It's not fantastic by any means, but it's decent. And then you get In the Court of the Crimson King, my personal favourite song on the album, the title track. Absolutely brilliant. So powerful, so emotional. I know people who don't like prog rock that actually like this song. So all around, In the Court of the Crimson King is one of the greatest albums ever made. 5 songs that all sound completely different. I mean, no wonder it was so ahead of its time and so experimental, and so it blew so many people away. You get 5 songs here. All 5 of them sound different to what anyone was doing, and they all sound different to each other. Absolutely brilliant. Can't say much more about it. Number 2, Discipline, which I have the tattoo of right here. There. This is actually upside down if you've seen it. Yeah. Discipline's very, very good. I remember the first time I listened to it, I didn't know what to expect. I'd heard the Sheltering Sky before, but I hadn't heard any of the other songs, and I listened to it and I wasn't quite sure what to think. This was actually the second King Crimson album that I'd ever listened to, and The Court of the Crimson King was the first. So I wasn't quite in the same group as people who listen to it and think, this isn't King Crimson, what's this? You know, some people sort of listen to their 80s stuff and sort of think, this isn't King Crimson, what's this stuff? But I actually thought, and even now it sounds very King Crimson. King Crimson's more of an atmosphere, it's more of a way of making music. It's not a certain sound, you know. Every King Crimson album is very King Crimson. And you could actually say In the Court of the Crimson King is the least King Crimson album, because every other album is sort of run by Robert Fripp, while that one was a bit more democratic and sort of run by all the band members. But Discipline's absolutely tremendous. Every song on it's brilliant. Elephant Talk's interesting and unique. It's got Frame by Frame, which is complex. Mate Kudasai is a beautiful sort of ballad. And Discipline's this crazy track that I've already done a review of it, so I'm just sort of quickly going through it. And Discipline's absolutely crazy. Dillahan Jinji is absolutely tremendous. Some of the guitar work in the background is so good. The Sheltering Sky is probably my favourite on the album. I love how slow paced it is, but how atmospheric and beautiful it is. Then Discipline is just so good, how complex it is, all the different time signatures flying around, but how it's sort of, it's smooth as well. It's very interesting. I've heard it described as having a manic feel. I don't think it sounds manic at all. I think it actually sounds very smooth. Discipline, the track, but all around, Discipline is easily one of the greatest albums ever made, and so different to what was going on at the time. And it just sort of showed that prog bands in the 80s could still try new things, and that's why King Crimson were one of the few bands that managed to survive into the 80s, like Rush, bands like Rush and Genesis. Genesis went pop, so that sort of helped them get through, but bands like Rush and King Crimson, they kept to the more progressive sound, and they just kept experimenting, while other bands like ELP had sort of ran out of ideas, so that sort of stopped them in their tracks. So that's why I personally think that bands like King Crimson and that were able to survive into the 80s. You had to keep experimenting, and just some other bands had just sort of ran out of ideas, unfortunately. But Discipline is absolutely brilliant. Number one, anyone who knows King Crimson, obviously the one I haven't mentioned yet, and it's so good I'm going to lift up the vinyl. Larks, Tongues and Aspic. One of the greatest albums ever made. Maybe the greatest. I don't actually have a single favourite album, but this would definitely be a contender. 6 tracks, and all of them are absolutely brilliant. Some are better than others. It starts off with Larks, Tongues and Aspic Part 1, 13-minute instrumental song that totally different to what King Crimson had done previously. You've got Bill Bruford's tremendous drumming, John Wetton's heavy bass sounds, David Cross is brilliant with the violin, and Robert Fripp. I'd say Red is the first grunge album ever, but I'd say this was where grunge started, especially Larks, Tongues and Aspic Part 2, the bit that goes dun-na, 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 dun-na. For 1973, that sounds like a grunge riff from like 1993. For 73, that is so ahead of its time. And Easy Money's interesting because it's slightly jazzy, I think. And the talking drum, I think, is sort of the forgotten song on the album, but I absolutely love it. It's like an industrial sort of heavy dance tune from the late 90s. You could actually dance and headbang to the talking drum in a nightclub, I'd say. But it's a prog rock song from 1973. My personal favourite song on the album, though, is Exiles. And that's my personal favourite King Crimson song ever. I think it is so beautiful. It's sort of like King Crimson are known for the more dark, angry, sort of heavy stuff, but I think Exiles is so good, just how beautiful it is. The mellotron is so haunting and so atmospheric. Robert Fripp's guitar solo near the end, it's so good. And the drumming's really, really good on it as well. It's slow and sort of slow paced, but it definitely adds something. Just say Exiles is the best King Crimson song ever, in my opinion. I absolutely love it. But anyway, I'm sort of 23 minutes in here. So this was King Crimson ranked, and I'll actually also have in the Court of the Crimson Kingdom vinyl. I don't know why I didn't lift that up. Doesn't matter. Thanks for watching. Any other bands that you'd like me to do a ranked video of if you're interested? I would obviously have had to listen to all their albums, which isn't that many bands. Like Rush, I've got other albums, Iron Maiden, Van der Graaf Generator. I've listened to every Moody Blues album between Days of Future Past and the present, so I could maybe do, that's 10 albums, so I could maybe do a top 10 Moody Blues. It's up to you, if you let me know if you're interested. So thanks for watching, and I hope I didn't offend anybody too much with my opinions, and hope you want to see King Crimson as well, anybody, or has seen them, anyone who's watching. Thanks for watching.